Welcome to Drinks in the Library, the only library where drinks aren't just allowed, they are required. I'm your librarian host, Gigi Howard, and each episode I'll be interviewing a guest about a much-loved book that we will be pairing with a drink for you to enjoy along with us or consider for your next book club meetup. As always, stay curious and support your local library. Hello, Libration Nation. This week's book is Daring Greatly by Dr. Brené Brown, and I'm talking about it with my fellow librarian and library advocacy rock star, Sonya Durney. Sonya is a passionate advocate for libraries and open education. She is the scholarly communication, research, and teaching librarian at the University of New England. Also, she is past president of the Maine Library Association, a member of the American Library Association Policy Corps, and serves on the executive board of the Maine Freedom of Information Coalition. Sonya holds an MLIS from Simmons College, a BA in political science from Framingham State University, and a doctorate in public policy focusing on educational leadership from the Muskie School of Public Service at the University of Southern Maine. Her research centers on the intersection of public policy and libraries, exploring how legislation shapes access to information. And when she's not immersed in her work or reading, Sonya loves to spend some time outdoors in Maine, enjoying adventures with her husband, her son, and their beloved chocolate lab, Bourbon. Talking about this book with Sonya, and thinking about the challenges librarians are facing today, book banning, and really ruminating on Brown's call for us to be in the, really ruminating on Brené Brown's call for us to be in the arena, whether it's addressing book bans or advocating for our community resources, stepping up despite fear of criticism. All of this really embodies the essence of Daring Greatly, and Sonya shared her experiences and inspiration pulled from Brené Brown's work. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention to please visit www.uniteagainstbookbans.org and find ways that you can be involved. It was so much fun talking with Sonya. We met up at the Virginia Library Association conference, and that's where we recorded this in my hotel room. So you can hear in the audio, sometimes you can hear foghorns or ships a little bit in the background, which is really cool. Our drink this week is a Mezcal Paloma. Also, Brené Brown is proudly sober, and to honor that, we're including the recipe using Ritual Zero Proof non-alcoholic tequila, which I've used for a previous episode. Without further ado, enjoy. ALA's Policy Corps and Unite Against Book Bans. Tell us the story of that. Like, how you got involved? What is it?
Sure. Let's see. I have been in the ALA Policy Corps, which is a group of librarians from across the country who work with ALA to get training, to be advocates. We're called on when things come up in our states or when there's opportunities to speak. I'm here now in Virginia.
Yeah.
Yes.
And how did you get started with ALA Policy Corps?
I first got started, ACRL had a grant for academic librarians to come down when ALA used to do the National Library Legislative Day in Washington, D.C. People would come from all over the country and meet with legislators to advocate for library funding.
Yeah.
So I received a scholarship to go down and fell in love with doing the work and the energy of the people, all advocating for libraries, and wound up. I saw an application for the Policy Corps, and I applied twice. I did not get in the first time. And the second time I got a call during COVID, I remember just looking out my window. We were trapped in our house and got the good news that I was accepted. Yeah, we did a training. So it was a little bit of a different year because of COVID. Normally you would go down to Washington, D.C. a few times for in-person training. So we did a lot of Zoom. But then since then, I've been able to be involved with the Unite Against Book Bans initiative, which is also an ALA initiative. And we have a group of Policy Corps members. There's been 4 cohorts now. And so there's a few people from each cohort, and so we're all working to get the word out to librarians to make sure librarians know what's going on, which most of us do, but make sure that librarians know there are tools there for it, but also really trying to get the word out to like community members and other organizations about what's happening.
Yeah.
And explaining like why it's so important for these books to be in the libraries.
Yeah, and it's Unite Against Book Bans, and it's .com. Like, you can get online, right? Okay.
Yes, and anyone can get on, and it is meant for community members to sign up. It's not meant for a librarian audience. Librarians certainly should sign up, and there's tools there for librarians also, but it's really to get the community engaged.
Yeah, and to know what's going on, and to see it, and I've had this conversation so many times about people just don't realize that it is serious. In the news, there's all kinds of things going on in the world, and then you see a little tiny line, maybe there's a book ban in your state, or something big happen in another area of the country. But it has impacted our work and our services so much.
It has, and we're spending so much time talking and thinking about it when we should be like innovating and creating and doing other pieces of our jobs.
Exactly. And there's also so much money. Our money, the money that should be going to libraries, but it's also taxpayer money that is being spent, by the way, on reviewing books that 98% of the country have zero qualms about being in libraries. And I think it's just a huge time suck, money suck, all of the things.
And the damage that it's doing to people who don't have access to these books.
Yeah. So anyway, so thank you so much for the work that you do. And what does that work look like day to day?
It depends on the week. I'm doing that work with two different hats on. One is with the ALA Policy Corps, but also I'm the past president of the Maine Library Association.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so we track things in our state, see what's happening, and that involves writing a lot of support letters for libraries, showing up to public hearings. We write op-eds, anything we can do to get the word out and make sure people know what's happening, and to call people to advocate and be activists when we need them to. But it depends. Like last year we had, in Maine anyhow, we had 0 challenges basically from like 2000 to 2018. And then just like the rest of the country in 2019, the numbers started going up, and then we've seen like 25 or so a year, which isn't huge numbers compared to some other states, but we're a pretty rural state and our population's not that high, so it is still a big spike for us. But we haven't seen anything this year, so it's so up and down. And we also, I'm getting too into the weeds. I could nerd out on this stuff.
Yeah, go for it.
Our legislature only meets every other year, so we didn't have any new bills introduced last year, so that gave us a little bit of a lull. So legislation's at session, upcoming session, so we're expecting it will be busy again.
And sessions, same probably here in Virginia, run usually like January, February through...
December through the spring, late spring.
Yeah. So it's a busy season.
Yeah, so it's cyclical, and like with the ALA work, I would say it ramps up during conference seasons, right? A lot of libraries have them in the spring and the fall, but we meet throughout the year and make sure we're all aware of what's going on and share updates from across the country.
But you're connected, and it's interwoven and all of those things. And I thank you so much for the work that you do. I think a lot of that... It goes seen by some of us, but it goes unseen by many, that there are people behind the scenes actually keeping things in check.
There are, but there's so many people. It's at all levels in our states and our local communities. Teachers are doing the work. We have colleagues in related fields. It's taking everyone.
Yeah. And with that, I will start talking about the book that you chose, which is...
I chose Daring Greatly by Brené Brown, which is one of my favorite books by her, as she has numerous books, I think 6 New York Times bestsellers. So she has written a lot. She has a podcast that has almost 200 episodes. She has 2 podcasts with almost 100 episodes. So she has a really wide range of work, but I did want to focus on this book, but I'll probably interweave things because I've mixed it all together in my head now.
Yeah, because she has, so Daring Greatly, I think, was the, probably the big impetus for a lot of the other books. She wrote one, The Gifts of Imperfection, came out prior to Daring Greatly, but Daring Greatly came out in 2012. And then she has other books. And in fact, because we were talking about Daring Greatly, which I've read before, I decided to pick up Dare to Lead, which honestly has a lot of the same concepts of daring greatly in it. But yeah, it was fun to revisit all of it a little bit. So who were you when you read Daring Greatly?
That's a great question. I think I'm human, so I suffer, I guess that's not the right word. Mm-hmm. I work with the same issues that she talks about, feeling very vulnerable, feeling shame, perhaps when you've put yourself out there. I don't know that I realized the depths to which I felt it until I saw someone else modeling what that looks like and sharing their own experience, and it put words to what I was feeling a lot and realizing, oh, this is a common thing that we all share.
Yeah. Perfectionism. What does that mean to you?
A way of life. Yes, my therapist once told me to put the bar down so low you can step over it. She's like, you have that bar up way too high. I just want you to put it down and step over it.
Yeah.
But a lot of people.
A lot.
Yes.
Yeah, a lot of us. I don't want to genderize it, but I think women often are told to be loved, you have to be perfect. You have to be beautiful. You have to be smart, but not too smart. Not smarter than not smarter than a man. And never make a mistake. And yeah, perfectionist.
Yeah.
I guess a good question is also like, when did you read Daring Greatly? Did you read it back then?
I did read it back then. Yes. Yep. And that's revisiting it. New things struck me because I knew it always resonated with me. But again, like with her so many podcasts and other things, I feel like she's been consistent in my life since then. But I couldn't, as I mentioned, everything feels dovetailed. So going back to look specifically at that book, it hit again listening to it. I listened to the audio and then read some book summaries of it again and listened to Super Soul Sunday with Oprah like 3 times.
Oh, I haven't listened to that.
So good.
Is her podcast called Super Soul Sunday?
Oprah's is.
Okay.
Brené Brown has 2 podcasts. One is Dare to Lead, which the audience is people in leadership. Yeah. And the other is Unlocking Us, which is more looking at yourself and reflecting.
Yeah. Okay. Good for her.
Yeah.
She's very busy, and it reminds me a little bit of her willingness to step into the messiness of life, of her talking about, I can't remember if it was it must have been a Dare to Lead, but her team like comes to her and they're basically tell her that she's terrible at time management. That she has to like deal with that. I also struggle with perfectionism. Yeah, so I think also hearing her say that in the book was really valuable for me at the time. And I read it probably in 2012, 2013, before I had my daughter in 2014, so it was before I became a mom, but...
I had my son in 2014.
You did?
I did, yes. So we both have 10-year-olds.
Yeah, so we were pregnant at the same time. Very cool. Do you just have one son?
I do.
Okay, me too. One girl. We can talk more about the kid stuff later.
I remembered what I was going to say about perfectionism is that I was second-guessing wanting to talk about Brené Brown and her work a few days ago as I was revisiting everything because there's so much of it. And then I was like, you could almost write a dissertation on her work, which I looked in ProQuest dissertations and theses, and dissertations have been written about her work. I saw at least 18 that mention her shame theory as their theoretical framework. So anyhow, I was like, you gotta let it go. You cannot know everything about this before you go on the podcast.
Yeah.
So at one point I'm like, I'm just gonna let it go and go talk, even though I don't have every quote memorized and what page it's on. And
yeah, and I think that reminds me, and I don't usually do this, but I actually did take notes because I was rereading it. One of the first things she talks about is less thinking, more feeling. And I think a lot of her story, a lot of the book talks about what we know matters, but who we are matters more. Yeah. So I guess that's a good question is like, what is this book about?
I think it's about a few things. It's definitely about daring greatly, right? Being brave, but also realizing, as you'll recall, it talks about Theodore Roosevelt's The Man in the Arena poem, which I love.
Would you be willing to read it if you have it available?
Yes. Okay. Theodore Roosevelt said, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least he fails daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. So basically what he's saying is if you're not in the arena, if you're not being brave and out doing the things, your criticism doesn't matter if you're not doing the work and in the arena also. And I love that because it makes me think about, in relation to libraries, like how scary it can be to get up and speak up for books when you know the pushback that librarians are getting, the trolls and the doxing. It takes a lot of courage to get out there. Mm-hmm. And it's not easy just to wash it away, of course, because criticism stings, and you can spend hours going down the mess of social media comments, and if you submit an op-ed letter, you log in and you look at the comments, and it's like personal and it hurts. But then I don't need to hear from these people who are posting anonymously. Like, they don't matter. If someone wants to show up and talk about this, I'm happy to engage and talk mm-hmm. about these things, but it can be really hard to get out there and talk.
Yeah. And also, I do want to touch on, just explain what doxing is.
It is basically, I actually don't know if it's like short for something. Do you? It's just when you're really trashing someone's reputation, with or without reason. It can be, in the case of librarians, a lot of the books that people are working to censor have LGBTQI themes.
Yeah.
And
but it's also like when you share people's personal information online. And
sharing their personal information. And there's just a lot of name calling happening. Like, basically, if librarians are choosing to keep LGBTQI materials in their library, as they should, folks who are doxing them are calling them like pedophiles, because for some reason LGBTQI equals pornography, which it does not. Like, that's not true. But then librarians are being called like pedophiles and groomers and things of that nature. So sharing their personal information, name calling, home addresses, pictures, like, it's a tough time.
Yeah, but those that are doing it, like you said, they're not in the arena. They're not doing the work. And do we value the opinions of people who are just online trolls?
Like, it's not worth the time or the energy.
Yeah, so going more into the story a little bit, is also feeling like you're enough, I think, is also like a personal part of it too. And I know for me, sometimes I am like my own number one worst critic. I got a wonderful compliment today, and I immediately looked in the mirror, and like all I see is everything's wrong with me. And how sad is that? But anyway, I was also thinking about that and comparing it to Daring Greatly a little bit, and like, I am enough. And feeling the sense of worthiness too.
Yeah, it's hard to feel like you're enough, especially when more and more is asked of people all the time. And I know, like, imposter syndrome runs rampant in people, but especially there's even studies on how, like, librarians suffer like high amounts of imposter syndrome. Not to bring everything back to libraries, but
no, let's do it.
I just feel like, as librarians, when I first got my first reference job, I was terrified that someone was going to ask me a question and I wouldn't know the answer. But how would we know all of the answers? We can't know all of the answers. We can help people find them and we can explore together, but we don't have to know everything off the top of our head. But I was so terrified that people would find out I wasn't actually smart enough to be working at the reference desk.
But it's like that's a total fear. Is I love exploring information, but I think other librarians who are listening are just like, oh, I'm not the only one. You're not the only person that gets nervous when somebody walks up and says, I'm a public librarian. So mine is, I have a struggling second grade reader. What do you recommend? And I want to find the perfect thing. And of course you can't. You can only do your best.
Yes.
What would you say the vibe of the message is a better term for her story? What would you say the message of Daring Greatly is?
Overall, to me, it just says to show up, even when showing up is hard. And when you do show up, that you might have a shame hangover the next day. How many times have we all had to do some sort of public speaking and you have an out-of-body experience, and then you spend your whole car ride home or your next day beating yourself up that you didn't say everything perfectly, but you have to let that go. So that's one of the big takeaways for me, is to just show up, be brave, and when those shame hangovers come, just push it away. The whole piece of the man in the arena, haters are going to hate, but you don't have to listen to them unless they're doing the work alongside you and willing to have conversations. We certainly don't all have to agree on things, but you have to be willing to talk, or nothing's going to get better. We're just all too divided, I think, right now. I think showing up and being in the arena and working towards what we're working towards.
Yeah. What does showing up look like to you?
It depends on what it is. There's so many different things you need to show up for. Are you showing up for your family, showing up for friends, showing up for your job, showing up for your community? But I think it's being present and doing what you can to help a situation, if something that you have the skills and bandwidth to help with. But I think sometimes, and I'm still working on this, I'm definitely a work in progress, sometimes showing up means not showing up and saying no if you're feeling burnt out or stressed, and calling on someone else to show up. But that's showing up too, because you have to model self-care, which is another theme throughout the book, is modeling vulnerability, modeling self-care. So I think it is showing up still. You need to set those boundaries and recharge yourself, and then you can show up for others. Yeah. And sorry, I was going to ask you the question back. What does it look like for you?
I think it's a good question for me right now, because rereading this has re-energized me in a certain way of when times get hard, sometimes I think I shut down a little bit. I disconnect. It's maybe I don't know, maybe I should talk to my therapist. But I also realize that I am a leader. I think I'm like a natural leader. Like, I get put in situations somehow. Maybe it's because I'm the loudest one in the room. I don't know. But I think I also have good judgment, and sometimes I think I need to acknowledge that I can help other people, and maybe other people are looking at me to see, what is she going to do? What's she going to do next? And when I don't do that, when I have stepped away and said, it doesn't help anybody. So, I don't know. Yeah, you're asking me that, like, when I am very much in the throes of thinking about this very personally. Who am I at work? Who am I in my position, in my role? And it's scary. It's tricky. I think I'm a people pleaser for sure. And so she was talking about in the book, nobody wants to have the difficult meetings. Nobody wants the uncomfortable situation. No one wants to feel like anyone's mad at them. But when you don't brave, and that's another thing that she talks about, braving
the wilderness.
Braving the wilderness. She says strong back, soft front, wild heart. And I think I definitely am somebody that's I just want to keep the peace and I don't want to rock the boat. But then when I've noticed when I just always keep the peace, then I'm also like letting other people down who maybe don't have the same platform that I do or don't have the same position that I have. And so I think it made me think I probably need to speak up a little bit more. It's scary.
It's scary because then criticism can come, and not everybody's going to like people. Like you were saying, you're a people pleaser. You want everyone to like you, and sometimes when you stand up and say something, it impacts that feeling of, everyone getting along.
And she has an anecdote in there where she talks about that somebody walked up to her after a presentation and they were like, I'm ready to be vulnerable. I'm going to go and do it. It's going to be great. And she was like, if you think this is going to be great, like, you do not understand what this means.
Yeah, and you were just saying about speaking up more. In Braving the Wilderness, I'd written this down too. She had a few lines, and as you said, strong back, soft front, wild heart, but also speak truth to bullshit, but be civil. So both of those things can be true too. So sometimes we do have to speak up, but it's our message and how we convey it. I love that's something that Brené Brown writes about and talks about, that you can be vulnerable, but you can also feel joy. And we can't all just be out in the arena, and we all have causes that are very important to us and that we're being brave and speaking up about. But also, it's okay on your day off or even at work to spread some joy and have fun, too. We can't be serious warriors all the time.
Yeah, and I think talking about that as a parent, too, she talks a lot, and I'll frame this and I'll let you go. She talks a lot about the experience of looking at your child and thinking about how much you love them so much, and that's the best thing that's ever happened to you, and then all of a sudden imagining the worst possible scenario. Has that ever happened to you?
Yes, and not just with my child, with like everything. You're like just driving to work and you're like, everything's going pretty good. What's going to happen?
That waiting for like the other shoe to drop. But also catastrophizing, imagining the worst possible thing doesn't protect you, right?
But it's sobering because really bad things do happen, unfortunately, all the time, too. So when you're in that loop of waiting for the other shoe to fall, you can justify it in ways, too. That's going into a dark place. But, like, shit is happening, and it's scary out in the world. And, yeah, it's reality.
But she talks a lot about that people that have had the worst things happen, nothing can prepare you for it anyway.
Right.
Wasting your joy doesn't benefit them at all. You want to have those moments of pure joy, pure happiness. You sort of build up a reserve of it, too. Also, it reminded me, and I'll tell you, I wrote this down, because this is one of my favorite quotes, and it's from Vonnegut, Kurt Vonnegut. My husband's a big fan, but his quote is, "I urge you to please notice when you are happy and to exclaim or murmur or think at some point, if this isn't nice, I don't know what is." And
I have that printed out and pinned to a bulletin board over my desk. Sure do.
Aww.
My home desk, not my work desk. So I haven't.
It belongs everywhere.
Right. It belongs everywhere.
Because I do think that's so true, right?
Just enjoying the moment and not always thinking about what comes next and what else do we have to do before it's always, I have to do this and then I'll enjoy the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, enjoy it while you have it, because it might not last forever, but then you have that joy reserve. At least you have those little snapshots in time of when you were really feeling it. And also going back to library advocacy, like having to deal with really tough stuff. What kind of well do you draw from in those moments?
There's lots of things that bring me joy about this work. I think one of the big ones is the people that I'm able to work with doing this, whether it's my colleagues in Maine or the folks in the policy corps or the students that it's impacting and the library patrons. One thing that brought me a ton of joy recently was during banned book weeks. I work at a college, and we set up a table out in like a common area outside, and we had music playing, we had a bunch of banned books out, and we had QR codes for students to register to vote. We had handouts on what's happening with censorship, and we're explaining how it's tied in with the legislation happening to promote the different laws that are being passed in different states, whether it's to criminalize librarianship or book ratings and all the stuff that's happening. So it was an informational day for students to come learn, but they were super engaged. Like, we had a mob of students around us, and they were shocked at what was happening. Like, some of them had heard it in the news, but they were really shocked, and we purposely pulled books that would resonate with them. So students were like, why was Harry Potter banned? And we're like, it's a wizard, it's witchcraft, that's bad. And they're like, and Tango Makes Three, that's a classic. I'm like, oh, gay penguins, we cannot have that. That's just, we can't have that. Like, they were like really surprised at the extent of it. And so that brought me a lot of joy, though, because they were fired up and like, what? This is wrong. What can we do? And it was really encouraging to see students caring and excited to vote. And yeah, it was just, that brought me a lot of joy.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, and hopefully they go and spread the word themselves, too. And I think that's also a good question for you, is for the layman out there. Sorry, I keep hitting that. What can they do to stop or to fight against some of what we're seeing in censorship?
I think just paying attention to what's happening and being aware. I know there's so many issues that grab our attention, but I feel that access to information is fundamental to fixing any of the issues. I'm not sure, are you familiar with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals?
I'm not. No.
There are 17 different areas of goals that the United Nations would like to achieve by 2030. And they're in different areas like clean water, strong justice systems, the environment, and information is one of them. And I feel like information is core to all of these challenges. They're all connected, which is what's cool. So like you can pair, there's 17 issues, and a lot of things are interdisciplinary. They touch on many of them, and I just feel like information touches on all of it, because we can't solve any of these problems unless we have the information that we need, whether it's science or even stories.
Yeah.
So I just feel like it's really key to solving any of the problems that are happening in our society.
Yeah, I think most of us, if we're informed about what's actually happening, want to do the right, to do the decent, to act with dignity, and information is the basis of that.
But some of the things that people can do also to push back on this do take daring greatly. It could be that there's an issue in your town and you get an email because you're a known library supporter, and they say this is happening at your public school. Are you willing to go down and make comments? And that can be scary, because if you've watched any of those meetings, some of them they can be uncivil sometimes. Sometimes they're civil. Every board has different rules set up, so it's really important that there's a process for people to petition, but also it needs to be done civilly. But it's scary. It can be scary to stand up like that in front of your neighbors and folks if, like you said, you want like everyone to like you, or you don't want to ruffle feathers, or you just want to go about your business without fighting with your neighbors over books.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. I'm glad this book calls us to do all of these things and to take care of ourselves. I did want to give you the chance, because we did talk a little bit about Brené, and you brought to my attention there's been, as anybody in the public eye, Brené speaks up on a lot of different things, and she had a scenario that came up recently that we wanted to acknowledge.
Yeah, when I was doing some more research for this podcast just this afternoon, touching up before I came to talk to you, I realized that Brené published an article last February called Not Looking Away, Thoughts on the Israel-Hamas War, and it got a lot of pushback from some communities. It was her thoughts on what is happening in Israel and Palestine right now, and I haven't had time to fully absorb it because I did just come across this before we met, but there was definitely a lot of pushback on it, and I came to you and thought, maybe how do we acknowledge this? Do we not talk about it? Do we talk about it? So I was really thrilled to hear you say we should acknowledge this. And I heard Brené talking, right, that we need to be open to talk about complicated things.
And so, yeah, she got herself in, I guess that's probably not the right way to say, get yourself into hot water. It sounds so Southern. I don't know what my voice added to the fray is going to help anything.
It's extremely complicated, and I think there are things going on in the world that we can't all be experts on. I think there are just things that we can't speak super intelligently on without experiencing it. I appreciate that Brené Brown released a response to the criticism and acknowledged that she's learning along with the rest of us. I think that was brave, and she discussed many points. I don't know, it just felt difficult to come talk about her after reading some of the criticism, but also everyone has their opinions. For instance, one of the pieces of criticism I read were she's a privileged middle-aged white lady, and we're here as two privileged middle-aged white ladies applauding her, right, and her work. But one thing I would push back on in one of the criticisms of her was basically, I'm paraphrasing here, but calling her like a self-help guru, a corporate guru, like in my interpretation of the reading, like calling her a bit of a sellout. And I mentioned how she calls herself a researcher, but it was in quotes. She is a researcher. Yeah. She was a faculty member for years and years. She has a PhD, like she does research, and reports on her data. It's not her opinion, her studies and stuff. This piece was her opinion, not looking away, based on learning she had done. But it just felt uncomfortable to come and talk about it. But also, I still really admire her research and her body of work and her findings and how they can be applied to us. So I'm glad that we're still here talking about her and her work.
Yeah. Well, we want to have people fully cooked. We want to have everybody perfect and never make mistakes. And those are the only people we could ever look up to. Guess what? There's nobody out there that hasn't had a wrong opinion or changed their mind. And it doesn't take away from the fact that she's put out work that has positively impacted hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. So I think it's still really important to acknowledge that, yeah. And that's part of the journey as well. We'll see where she goes from here with her thoughts on advocacy or whatever she wants to talk about with this.
Speaking of her thoughts on advocacy, when you first reached out and I was thinking about different books to explore, at first I was like, I need to find a Maine author to represent Maine. I went through this whole realm of things, and I thought about Daring Greatly a few times because I really did love the book. I love the message. And then I was like, I don't know enough about Brené Brown. Perfectionism kicked in. I can't learn everything about her to talk about her. I'll say something wrong. I'll cite something wrong. But then I was listening to one of her podcasts in the car, and she was talking with one of her colleagues, and they were talking about the digital divide. And her colleague then was discussing how libraries address that. I got my love of libraries from you, Brené. And then Brené said, I'm sorry, I'm going to read again, but this is really good. Yeah, libraries are where people go for high-speed internet when they don't have it at home. And so when you defund a library, you can change the economic future of an entire family. So cut that shit out. It goes on, but I love that. And I'm surprised no one in the library world yet has made a meme of that. Don't defund libraries, cut that shit out.
This is it. This is the meme. It's going to be this. Yeah, but no, it's so true. People don't realize you cut a library, you think you're coming for this, whatever you believe the library or the library staff stands for. You're coming for the kid who doesn't have books at home, or the senior citizen that doesn't have the internet, or someone that would otherwise. There's so many resources that we provide that I always talk about my job as depressing, but as a catch-all. The last place that people go when somebody at social services wouldn't help them, or they couldn't get all the paperwork filled out for their loan, and there's all sorts of things that we do that provide for people that that are making the legislature. They don't have time because their lives are so busy with just trying to keep it together.
Yeah. Yep.
So thank you, Brené. She said it much more eloquently than I could.
Yes, when she said that, I was like, okay, I need to talk about her now. It's a sign. It's a sign from her herself.
Wonderful. I love that so much. Is there anything from the book that we didn't touch on or you were hoping we would get to?
I think we haven't talked about failure at all either, which she talks about a lot, how you can innovate. And when I say innovate, I don't mean in a corporate sense. I think of it as even just making our libraries better, climate change innovations, making our communities better. But you can't do any of that without failing. Yeah. If you're going to be brave, you're going to fail.
Yeah.
I think that's really important to remember because we're all so afraid of failure because it goes back. I guess we did touch on this with perfectionism, but we're so afraid of failing, and it's paralyzing.
And there's no innovation, there's no creation without trying. A lot of life was just throwing things on the wall and seeing what sticks. So our drink today is a Paloma, and we did do it spicy. So yours has Mezcal in it. What is Mezcal? Because I was not super familiar with it.
Mezcal is tequila's cousin.
Okay.
So they're both Mexican spirits made from the agave plant, but they have several key differences. Tequila is made from the blue agave plant, while mezcal can be made from over 400 different agave species.
Okay.
So they're very similar.
Okay. And I think mezcal has a little smokiness to it. Yes.
Yes, so it makes it a smoky Paloma. Paloma.
Yeah, and we chose it because her home state is Texas, so she's Texas Southern. I'm like East Coast Southern. So, but it's sort of the same thing.
And we should note that Brené Brown is very proudly sober.
Yes.
And that mocktail Palomas are also very delicious.
Mm-hmm. And I have made Palomas before with Ritual non-alcoholic tequila, and I do recommend it. I always say put a little bit more of that in. So if you do 2 ounces for a regular Paloma, put 3 ounces of the Ritual non-alcoholic tequila, because it just makes it taste a little bit more of that smoky spiciness. But yeah, I will say, rereading this, I knew she was sober, but she is very vocal about her sobriety, which is wonderful, and so we are supportive of it. So definitely that is an option as well. And I guess my last question is always, who would you recommend Daring Greatly for?
Is it a cop-out if I say everybody? But I honestly do. I think it's a great book. I would say, this is strange, but I consider myself an extroverted introvert.
Okay.
So, like, I'm extroverted sometimes, but then introverted. So I feel like the whole shame piece really speaks to me, because I will be, like, rambling somewhere and then beating myself up for 5 days. Like, why did you talk so much? So I feel if there's any other extroverted introverts out there, this book's really great. Also, I think it's great for advocates, right, as we've been talking about, because there's so much that you have to do publicly and put yourself out there, and the comment sections in the newspapers and on social media can be nasty when you're standing up for values that everyone doesn't necessarily agree with.
Yeah, so definitely the people in the arena.
The people in the arena.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one other thing, is there anything you want to shine a spotlight on, or anything you've got coming up that you would like to people to be able to find you doing something?
I'm here in Virginia, as we are here for the Virginia Library Association conference, and tomorrow we are going to be talking about Challenging the Challengers, the American Library Association's policy core, and Unite Against Book Ban.
Okay.
So I know I'm like a broken record with the book ban stuff, but I would like to highlight, if people sign up for Unite Against Book Bans, it's really great to stay in the loop on what's happening, and it also allows us to activate grassroots advocates when there's book challenges in your community.
Yeah. And that can be as simple as you get an email, by the way, this is just going out, can you please go sign this petition? And that's the way people can quickly advocate, and they don't have to go to their town hall meeting, not necessarily immediately.
Yeah, there's all sorts of activism, right? There's activism you can do in 5 minutes, sending a quick email, or there's stuff you can put more time into. But yeah, even just dipping your toe in is great and helpful.
Well, thank you so much. This has been lovely, and welcome to Virginia.
Thank you. I've never been to, I'm going to pronounce it wrong now.
Norfolk?
Thank you.
I don't even pronounce it correctly.
Like, I'm afraid to even say the word. Will the FCC fine us?
The people, it is like, you have to be like, Norfolk. It's the Tidewater accent like that. But I'm from North Carolina, so I'm probably doing terribly. But
you did much better than I would have done. So thank you so much. This has been great. I was so glad to look at Brené's work again, and with a different lens, and to meet you and talk about it. This is wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time. It's been great. All right. Thank you for spending some time with me and my guests for an episode of Drinks in the Library. For more information about the show, you can find us on Instagram at Drinks in the Library, on the World Wide Web, drinksinthelibrary.com, or shoot me an email at drinkspod@gmail.com. Until next time, cheers.